Welcome to the Photofocus Q&A episode number 6. We're on September 1st, 2022. I'm joined this week. My usual co-host, Rob Moroto, is traveling, so I have a wonderful person filling in, Jeff Sullivan, from kind of near me up here in the California, Nevada area. He's holding workshops around California, Nevada, and a lot of other places like Death Valley, etc. So he's come in to help out with the questions. How's it going, Jeff?
Pretty good, Ron. How you doing?
Doing well. I should mention that we're recording at night. This is what Rob and I usually do too. I've got a glass of wine. I don't know about you, but we're having a relaxed Q&A. We have a handful of questions from Photofocus listeners and or readers, and even one of my own this time, just because we have Jeff here. So I should first give you a chance to, Jeff, to say a little bit more, like tell people a little bit where to find you. Maybe they're listening and want to see what you do. If they're podcast listeners that aren't driving, maybe they want to see a little bit of what you do to know that, yes, indeed, you're a guy that should be answering questions.
Well, my website is jeffsullivanphotography.com. Of course, I'm on all the usual places, Flickr, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and let's see, I probably have the most on Flickr. I've got over 10,000 photos there, and I'm at Jeffrey Sullivan is my username there. So if people want to check that out, they'll see a lot of my stuff.
So question number 1, is Flickr still a main place?
It is to me. I think it has the best cataloging capabilities because it has lots of tags and albums and, you know, every which way that you want to dice and slice your photos. And you can put them on there in just about any size, put as many as you want up there. Yeah, I really like it. And there's some interaction through groups and your friends and so forth. So it works really well.
Yeah, it's good. I've seen your stuff on Flickr, and I mean, and you're just guys go to everybody listening, Jeff Sullivan Photography. You'll see what I'm talking about. He's got, I mean, powerful stuff, really, and
thank you.
A lot of night photography too that we were talking about on the roundtable before. Last month or last couple times, night photography's come up, so we'll have to have you come back on the roundtable to do our what appears to be monthly nighttime photography discussion. But before we do that, I always forget to say who I am. I'm Ron Pepper. I'm leading a couple of the podcasts here each month on Photofocus. You can find me at ronpepper.com, and there are the other links to social and stuff there. I'm not that big of a social media guy, which is a little bit weird, I know, because of what I'm doing here. But, we do things because they're cathartic and good for our soul and getting out there and being social. And yeah. And let me real quick tell you what, let's do, we have a couple sponsors. Tamron, which they would like us to mention. They have the new, sorry, I went to look at notes and got messed up. They have a 28 to 200 millimeter, 2.8 to 5.6 lens. This is for Sony full frame. And we have a question because we talked about it, same sponsor last month, and we actually have a question about it. And so it gives us a chance to talk about Tamron lenses and a little bit more about the sponsor with a question. So that's perfect. Last month we had actually a question that let me talk about our second sponsor, which is Photomatix for HDR, high dynamic range photography. And you can find links to both on the show notes. Photomatix Pro 7 coming soon. You can download and try for free, hdrsoft.com. And lastly, photofocus.com/questions to send us questions here. All right. So with that said, let's go right into our first question that is not yet the lens question. This is probably go pretty quickly. It's a perfect question for yours truly. And we'll see if, Jeff, you have anything you want to add to this one before we get into the meatier ones coming up. But first of all, it comes from real estate photographer in Germany. So that's all the information we have. And she says, when I load my drone photos in some apps, mainly a stitching app, it adds vignetting and distortion, that wasn't there in the originals. And this is a really good either German person who speaks perfect English or something, because it says why the, and then it has all the characters to make a 4-letter word. Why the bleep or something. Why does it mess up my photos? I would say. I get this question doing something else that I do with some support for some software, and I've seen this with certain lenses that aren't supported. I don't know if you know about this, Jeff, but I'm sure you know about lens profiles. But
Sure.
So the background is that every lens these days almost every lens has lens profiles built into most software. So that means when you have imperfections in a lens, and you have imperfections in any lens, even the best one, then they're just less imperfections. And those are usually fixed kind of behind the scenes by a lens profile. So in other words, when I use, like, for instance, my Olympus Micro Four Thirds, a real small sensor with a really wide angle lens, there's distortion. They can't, it's just how physics is of lenses. They can't really not have distortion. So but I never see the distortion, because as soon as I take the photo, let's say I'm taking an interior and I can see like vertical lines that in the lens would have barrel distortion or pincushion distortion. You don't see that because it automatically fixes it right there with software in the camera. But so for the real estate photographer in Germany, make no mistake, that distortion is in the lens. It's just that the software is fixing it kind of behind, without being behind the scenes, so that it's really good user experience. So what happens is, if you load it in the stitching app, and I'm pretty sure I know what stitching app this is, being a panoramic guy, that just doesn't have support for that lens.
I was going to go one step further too, because he talks about vignetting, and often in your camera, you're probably shooting in RAW if you're serious, as a real estate photographer would be. And there's a setting in the camera for peripheral illumination correction. And it's basically where you have fall off in light in the corners. And that may be an additional to whatever additional effect you get from using, say, a wide angle lens and having vignetting there. So there may be a lack of support for his camera in RAW mode, or it may not support that particular feature, because the RAW file is going to have that flag on, and whether or not the software does something with it.
He did mention it's from a drone.
Sure.
So that's going to be, just from my experience, because I've had this question a lot, that those drone cameras, they have to be very small, very compact, very light, obviously. And so they're not the same as using your full frame Canon, Nikon, Sony, whatever. And so they're going to have less support, just being those kind of cameras.
So they'll be kind of simplified.
Yeah.
So
well,
some of the drones you tape a. I'm being facetious, but you stick a Sony on there, mirrorless light one, and send it on up. But
well, I'm sure this is a DJI drone with a build, which is basically a flying camera, right? Where it's just is very light. So without saying it, I don't want to say this is a bad way, because the drones are one of the coolest things as a gadget person. I think they're great, of course, but they just are not your high-end cameras. And I see the same thing happen with those ultra zoom compact cameras, where you zoom all the way out, and you zoom so far out that you actually get in frame on the sensor. You get the inside of the case of the camera. It's so wide.
So you actually get rounded corners.
Yeah, so it's actually the vignetting.
It's a feature,
is really,
not a bug.
Right. Well, so those lens corrections, they have to fix the distortion, and they have to crop it too. So you're going to notice that when you do see the distortion, there's more details. Like, you're going to see some more whatever. If you're flying over the house, you're going to see more trees, houses, cars, etc., compared to when it looks good, and when it's been fixed, then it's going to have to crop out some of those areas. So anyway, the point is that that is in the lens, and it's just the software. So your solution, really, if you don't have any better, is you just convert the. You can either just capture JPEG, which all that means I love this. I love always saying this. When someone quote unquote shoots JPEG, no one shoots JPEG. Everyone shoots RAW. It just means that it's converted instantly in the camera to JPEG because it's still the RAW sensor, right? But if you,
Mm-hmm.
so you can either do that or just use a high end RAW conversion to make TIFFs or JPEGs first and then stitch them. So that would be the way to handle it. But if you're using the stitching app I'm thinking of, it probably fixes the distortion as part of the stitching process because I use fisheye and it works with the fisheye distortion. So I'm sure it'll fix that distortion as well. So anyway, that's my two recommendations. Either convert it first or see if, I think you're talking about BT GUI. If you're using that, then it should probably work with those distortions just fine because that's kind of what it's made for, frankly. So let's move on. I called this an intermezzo question because Jeff, when I was saying, hey, can you join me this time on the show? You were saying that you were busy joining a photo contest. And I said, let's talk about that, even though it's my question. One reason is because I get a lot of messages, emails and stuff. I don't know why I'm on the list, but I get invites to all kinds of photo contests. And I've never really been a contest guy. So I thought I would ask you about your experience with it, and maybe we just take a couple minutes and take a little sidebar about what your experiences with those are. So I guess I should just ask you: are you a accomplished photo contest guy, or is this a new thing?
I didn't enter very many at first. Oh, actually, what I'm a big fan of are the really short-term, really low stakes contests where you don't have to pay to get in, and maybe they run one every week, and it gets you out there shooting, and it gets you thinking about how can I make this photo better at every stage of the way, from concept to getting the subject you wanted with the conditions you wanted, the light you envisioned, or adapting to what you have, and then processing it in a way that will fit the, who you think what you think the goals are of the judging. I mean, some they might be different of really wacky processing. Other ones may want it absolutely natural. How can you impress the judges without either, pissing them off or offending them?
So
so,
you're really doing it to push the creative juices more than
yeah,
these aren't looking for prizes as much. Right?
these are like fun contests. So one that I do enter when I have time. I don't do it every week, but Outdoor Photographer does one or two or three every month. Usually it's about 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 1 week. Sometimes they do it a little more. But it's uh, there's always a theme. So you try to come up with, like, right now I think it's storm images. And that could be a lot of things. It could be a sunset. It could be a thunderstorm. It could be dark clouds, whatever.
Could it be the Seattle
rough seas.
Could be the Seattle storm. They still have that.
It could be, the storm in the X-Men. You never know. You might run into her.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, you
in,
do.
in full dress.
That would be like a cosplay kind of thing.
Oh, whatever you're into, you never know. Just call a friend and say, "Hey, could you dress up?" I don't know.
Yeah, I got pulled in to help out with some. It was Vanelli that people in Photofocus will know. He was doing a shoot with a bunch of people dressed up as Star Wars characters. I just said, "Sure, I'll help." It was interesting. I mean, yeah. Anyway, that could happen. Yeah, go ahead. So you're Outdoor Photographer is one that you've done before, and
yeah, and then actually every once in a while they do one where there are actually some stakes. Like one time they said, "Oh, and we're going to do one that's for the cover of the magazine." And I envisioned what I wanted to do. I wanted to go get a moonbow in Yosemite Valley. I got there a day early so I could scout it out. And I found my location, and I was all ready to do it. And a big storm rolled in and wiped out there was going to be no moonbows because it was going to be raining and stormy, and I had to leave before the moonbows would come back. But the good news is my setup shot, I got a reflection with star trails of Yosemite Falls, and that still won the cover even without the moonbows. and they paid me $700. So here my fun little hobby of entering little contests just kind of blew up in my face and said, "Guess what? You're on the cover of Outdoor Photographer."
So that's what I was gonna ask you is if the normal person out there, if I'm gonna go and join photo contests, am I up against the Tom Brady of the photography world? And it's like I'm getting picked for what's that? I want to get picked for the basketball team, and it's either me or Charles Barkley. Like, is that is that the kind of situation?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people out there that are good, that are traveling a lot, that are taking lots of photos. Usually they're busy, unless they're independently wealthy, they've got some kind of job or something they do to make a living. And if they're leading workshops, you're dealing with your clients and helping them get their photos. If you're a real estate photographer, you're doing that, or weddings, or what have you. So they may have less time than an enthusiastic amateur to get out and set up a shot and envision it and go get it. Right. So on one hand, they may have a big portfolio from prior travel or what have you. But on the other hand, it's really probably not what they do for a living either. So everybody's got distractions, and sometimes you enter a contest or two. But
that's a good point. That's a good point. That's the playing field gets kind of evened out for reasons that we might not think of normally.
Yeah, and then the other thing is too, there was a really good example of a contest recently. I think it was a couple of years ago, big wildlife contest. I don't remember the name of it, but I heard the story, and it was that there was a big to-do about the winning photo because it was a wonderful subject of a baby elephant surrounded by his mother's belly and legs. And so it's just like the entire frame is elephant with the baby in the middle. And the controversy was that it was a little unsharp. So that just goes to show you that if you have a strong concept and a strong execution of even just the composition, if you don't get all the other technical things correct, you still could have a compelling photo that's good enough to win the contest. So I guess if you have to prioritize something, it's subject, 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 and composition. And everything else that everybody gets all hung up on is the focus sharp, is it sharp front to back? Well, it probably doesn't have to be. What's your subject? And is the lighting perfect everywhere? Well, maybe there's a flaw somewhere, but just make it strong enough. If you have a right subject and a good composition, make it strong enough that people can't ignore it, can't turn it down.
You could just either whether it's true or not, you can say you meant to do that.
Well, I've never gotten lucky. I mean, it's all skill. It's kind of like in golf. I'd rather be lucky than good.
Exactly. So, there was somebody said, I always try to attribute quotes, but I can never remember exactly. I'm sure it came from Rick Salmon that said, I'm pretty sure it did. He said somebody was complaining about the noise and the images, and they said the reaction that maybe it was him or his father. Somebody said, if what you're worried about in the image is the noise, then it's not really that compelling of an image, is it?
Right.
And I agree. I've got mistakes where I got the focus completely wrong, but it was really cool anyway. Focused on the wrong thing,
Back when Mountain Light Gallery, Galen Rowell's place in Bishop was still open, just a few years back, you could go in there and look at really big prints of his photography. And he was a 35 millimeter photographer, and the grain in a 35 millimeter camera was pretty large when you blow it up to 3 feet across. But he would do it anyway because it wasn't about whether or not you had the effect, the equivalent of what we would see as noise now. It was pretty similar. When you blow his up, he gets grain, looks kind of noisy. So I think there's a good.
Do you think grain, old film days grain, is similar to noise in the way? What am I trying to say?
It literally looked like noise. I mean, and then when they were able to remaster them in digital, they were able to clean them up quite a bit and improve them because you would look at some of his original work and some of the books he printed. They were, leading photographs at the time, or at least seen as competent enough and good enough to go into the book. And then you'd see them on the wall in the gallery, and it's like, wow, that's really kind of spruced up. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good thing. Ansel Adams would go back and edit his stuff a lot, and I do that all the time. I think I just produced a photo yesterday and put it on Flickr that was from, I want to say 2011. And that's the thing. I entered that contest today, and I entered 12 photos, and then I realized that 6 of them didn't qualify. And it was because they had said you can't have one older than 2017. And I hadn't seen that in the rules, but I later, after I uploaded all the photos, saw it in the Q&A. I don't know how I got to the Q&A after I'd already finished entering the contest, but fortunately it was super, super easy to delete the ones I'd uploaded and re-upload new ones. But what that does by saying you can't have one more than 5 years old is it eliminates that entire side of the creative process where you look at it with new eyes a year, 2 years, 10 years, 11 or more years later and say, I've got a new vision for that photo, and you completely rework it. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing out on, what Ansel Adams produced as some of his best work, where he went back and kind of reimagined what he was doing with an older photo.
Yeah, so, he was saying that the post processing, and that was in darkroom, not Lightroom. That was in the real darkroom, and he was saying I don't remember the quotes now, but it was more or as important as the shoot, probably more important if I recall, because
his Moonrise over Hernandez, he saw that, slammed on his brakes, got out. I think by the time he set up his tripod and camera, he had something like 10 seconds to get it all, ready and expose it. And so it was super, super fast, especially for that setup. And yet when he gets in the darkroom, he'd often spend 12 hours in the darkroom perfecting a print. And then he'd go and redo that whole thing 5 or 10 or 15 years later and have a totally different result. So I think
the darkroom days. Oh boy.
I think we get a little bit hung up on, you took the photo here and that's when the photo happened. It's not. It's when you had a different vision or a vision and you executed that in Lightroom. That's the photo. It's not what you took.
Yeah. Well, if someone sends us a question about what we think about capture versus post processing, like if it has to be captured and that's the image, versus doing all sorts of recropping, like composition or whatever word we came up with, and so recomposing and things, we can have that discussion. But I guess really we should go on. I just wanted to ask a few things about the photo contest. It's really interesting. One thing that jumped out at me is that you entered a whole bunch of photos, which I would have, my idea of photo contest would be one, but that's all sounds really interesting. Maybe I'll dive into that. Maybe we can get some comments and reaction from people. Recommendations for contests would be great in the comments. Stuff like that from anybody that is listening that has done that.
Yeah, part of the reason I could enter a bunch is that I almost never enter them. And so I had plenty that I hadn't, and going back many years, that I hadn't really shown very broadly. So figured, why not?
Yeah, that's cool. All right, well, let's... I'd just like to crinkle up and throw away my silly question that turned into, actually, thanks for sharing that with us. Let's go on to, we've got 2 others from listeners, and that I'm sure that'll use our time. So this one is, it says here, Errol in Covington. It might be Carol, but Arol. And I don't even know which Covington that is, so let's move on from that. The question is this is our lens question. So this is perfect. It says, I heard you guys talking about the new zoom lens on the show. Looking for a budget lens that is one of those zooms that can zoom way in and far out. Did I read that in a way that made sense? It can zoom way in and way out. So when you're talking about like a 18 to 200 or a 40 to 300, something like that. I heard that they aren't as sharp. Is that true? And do you have any recommendations? Well, you're going to get, I can tell you now, there's going to be no clear, specific answers, but I think we both have things we want to say about that. Do you want to start, Jeff, about your experience with those like super zoom? You're talking about a kit lens, maybe real long
that
to real
kind of
wide.
thing. Super zoom. I think it's obviously good enough to win that wildlife photographer contest.
There you go. It wasn't even sharp.
Doesn't have to be sharp. Just take good pictures. What's a good
great
picture?
How these things fit right together.
Strong subject. Yeah. I would say too, if you're not printing to 3 feet wide, like Galen Rowell all the time, then what do you need sharpness for? I mean, let's face it. The sensors these days are so much higher than you need for the typical 8x10 that somebody's going to print and put on their wall, or even 16x20 or 20x30. And then when you get back to a reasonable viewing distance, that's the thing too, because I do, another good lead in, I do a lot of night photography. People are always worried, what if there's noise? How do I get rid of all the noise? Well, how are people going to see the noise? They're going to, they're thinking of their photographer friends who are going to walk up 10 inches away and pull out a magnifying glass or loop and look at this thing and say, there's noise in that picture. No, you just grab them by the shoulders, pull them back 6 feet and say, how do you like the photo? This is where you view, a 20 or 30 inch photo.
You don't look at a paint. You don't look at a painting right up next to it, because all you see are the brush strokes. You don't see the painting, so it's a viewing distance. Yeah.
Yeah, and so same thing. Like in the Louvre. I mean, sure, but some of them are small paintings. Like a Rembrandt might be tiny. You might be up there looking close, but most of them you're sitting back quite a ways, and you're not looking at brush strokes. So absolutely. If that's your budget, keep within your budget, get what's good for you, and don't worry about what other people say. Because especially if you have 6,000 or 8,000 pixels wide, by the time you put it online, you're probably reducing it to 1,000 or 2 anyway. So that's like 2 to 1, 4 to 1 in each direction. Like when I go from an 8K file from my RAW file down to a 1K one to put on, Instagram or somewhere. That's 8 to 1 in each direction. That's 64 pixels going down to 1. So is anybody going to know if my lens was sharp? No.
Right.
So
that's what I've really come to think too, is that always with the caveat of, unless you have a specific reason and a specific use, and maybe you're a professional in a very specific area and you need that lens, then that's the only time that I think it would make sense to require that perfect lens. But if, depending on the situation, like I've been on, especially some years ago, I've been on trips to Italy, Prague, stuff like that, and I had one camera with one of those lenses, like the crop sensor, like a D300 from Nikon has 18 to 200, and that's what you call your walking around lens. And when you're traveling and you got a kid or kids with you and you're doing all kinds of things, it's not a photo trip, it's a trip. And then you bring that, and I have stuff I'm very happy with, even though it wasn't the highest quality, it's still so good that I should be able to get a great shot with the lens. The lens is not the problem. And
right.
And then if you put the okay, so having said that, I have one problem, is that those lenses usually don't have a very wide maximum widest open aperture is not as wide as the higher end zooms.
Yeah, they're not super fast.
Yeah, so that would be the one place where, and you can also lose a couple of stops. So if you're doing like something I've been doing over the last couple of years is I've been shooting my son's sports, and so I'll be shooting like football at night. And I don't have sport lenses. Like the pros are out there with their 400 millimeter prime 2.8s, and I've got my 7200, which is a great lens, 2.8, but it's a 200 max. So if I put an extender on there, I can put an extender so I can make the 400, but then I lose 2 stops, and it really does make an enormous impact, because losing those fields are not as bright as you think when when they say under the bright lights, they're not that bright.
They are a challenge for photography, having shot soccer myself, kids soccer.
Yeah. So I mean, there are, so having, like, I think we agree that the lens shouldn't be the problem, but there are situations where if I got to shoot at f5.6, then it's not, I'm not really happy with that.
Yeah, so, you'd have to be prepared to crank up the ISO, and then then you have to know if your sensor is going to give you a ton of noise. So
it's already cranked up at 2.8.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, and then the whole having that blurred background for sports too, you lose a significant amount of that when you stop down even that much. It really does make a difference, because one reason I do the shooting is to learn and practice, of course, in an area that I'm not a real expert at, and I've learned a ton. And so that's what I found is I am looking for someone to loan me a 400 millimeter for the season. So if Tamron had one, I would ask, because they're sponsoring us, but they don't have a 400 millimeter prime or long prime. So
sometimes if the lens doesn't have a real wide, fast aperture, then the autofocus can be challenged in low light too. So there's that trade-off there too. So I guess it just depends on if you're going to run around and do mostly daylight. If you're going to go, like you said, travel, and if it's mostly daylight shots, then you're probably fine. If you're going to go travel and take soccer photos at night under stadium lights, you probably want a faster aperture.
Right. When I went to go see a professional American football team in Italy play another Italian team, with that setup I mentioned, yeah, there was some high ISO, all right, very, very dark. And I got to go see the Parma Panthers play, so that was good.
I had the same experience. I got onto the field on an earthquake soccer game in San Jose, and
cool.
It was a challenge. That I wanted to switch lenses with some of the press guys next to me.
Yeah. Well, the one time I got to go shoot like a big time college football at USC, and I was there for something else, a different kind of photography, but I still rented a lens so that I could have that experience. So I just on my own, I got the job done early on, and then I could just go by the sideline, and wow, that was a big difference. And I got to go through, and I sort of followed what the others were doing, and that was a really great experience. It was worth a rental of a lens,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an option too.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's go to, we've got one more that we wanted to cover here, and then we should be in about our right amount of time that we shoot for the Q&A episode. We've got, let's see, we did Errol. That was the last one. Brianna in Michigan says, and this will be one where we're going to need to decide that we've just got to stop talking and finish it off, because we could probably go on. So the question is, I was reading some articles on the website about photography in fall weather. So first of all, thanks for writing in. So we have a reader who listens. So about fall, I'm sorry, why do I always chime in during the question? Okay, let me read it. I was reading some articles on the website about photography in fall weather. I don't want to think about it being fall, but do you have some outside of the box fall photo tips? So we're looking for outside the box. So I might have something that's outside the box. I hope you have more, because
I have quite a few ideas.
Oh, good. Well, why don't you start then, and I'll add some, and you can bookend.
Well, I think we better decide what the box is first, then we'll know what's outside of it. So I think for me, the two obvious things that I would say first to everyone is consider backlit leaves. Everyone thinks of having the sun shine on the leaves and reflect back at you, but I think when they're backlit, they really light up. So that's one that for me is in the box. The other is using a polarizer, because an awful lot of leaves that turn colors in the fall are shiny. And if you don't have a polarizer on and turn it to cut that glare, a lot of the leaves are washed out to white. So you end up wiping out some of the saturation of the entire tree, because a lot of it is coming at you as bright white. So you rotate the polarizer, and then it comes out much more saturated and with better contrast.
I had thought about a polarizer as well, but mostly thinking about just a lot of wet areas that are going to have quite a bit of reflection, and that could tame that down. So,
or to make the sky pop a little bit more against the
always,
yellow leaves and so forth. So that's the box. So what's your idea for out of the box?
Well, what did I actually jotted a couple things down because, well, for one thing, well, inside the box, I don't know if this is inside or not, but the main thing is when the weather isn't good for, say rainy. So just for life, we think of good weather as being sunny. Let's go out, let's go jogging, let's go to the beach, let's go sightseeing. But when the weather is quote unquote bad, that can be great for photography. That can be much better for photography. You got the big soft box in the sky, and you have, as you mentioned, you have these colors that pop much differently. These different things pop than in the rain or in bad weather. So my main one is when you get that, it could be spring or fall, when you get that changing weather, or you get something that's not normal, is don't think of that as a rainy day. Let's stay inside. That's good for photography. So that's the first one that I kind of wanted to throw out there. That I don't know if that's in or out of the box, but so if it's raining, put something over your camera, a camera cover or a plastic bag, and get out there. Because I've gotten some of my favorite, not like nothing that I'm going to enter in a photo contest, maybe, but maybe I could. Things that that kind of photography when you go with maybe your significant other or your family or something, and you go, okay, I'm in Northern California, so we'll go to a winery. And those are beautiful places with incredible landscaping. And I just took a few minutes and got, for me, outside the box photography because of those different colors and because of just because they were different. So that's what I would, and I got really wet. The camera got really wet, but most of the cameras are ready for that these days. That's my main one, is just use it sorry, I'm missing my words here. Take advantage of the situation. Use it as an advantage, not as something to watch out for.
I'm going to run through a few real quick then. I would say most people get a little bit hung up on when's the peak time for color. And for most people, that would be pretty late in the season when everything is fairly fully mature. Like for aspen here in the Eastern Sierra, they want to see them all yellow or bright yellow. And I actually like the early side of the season where things are very mixed, where you get some yellow, some oranges and reds, but all kinds of different shades of green, dark green, light green, going towards yellow. And I like that mixture because you can have every tree a different color. And I feel like it's a more colorful, more complex fall color than just all straight yellow. I like the straight yellow too, but consider going a little bit early. The other would be consider going late, especially if you see a winter storm coming. Some of the best pictures I have, some of my favorites, are right after a light snow where a lot of the leaves have blown down in the wind during the storm. Yeah. But you have just a few colors on almost bare aspen trees with a little bit of a dusting of snow. And that can be spectacular, especially as the storm's breaking.
I was going to try to go that way too, is think about late, like after if you're in a place with those great leaves, like you mentioned, then go after the fall, which is interesting. Or, but I'm in Northern California, but I'm from the evergreen state in Washington, where that's a true fact that there's evergreen trees for the most part. And so in those cases, I would look for just, again, different conditions, like swirling winds that maybe that does something really cool to the wildlife. You get the birds do some really interesting acrobatics and stuff like that. Or so wherever you are take advantage of that it's different, that it's not what you. Maybe I'm just more speaking to my own personality, but I just tend to think, those nice sunny days are the nice days, and then I need to remember that there's an advantage to the different times. And the only other thing that I jotted down ahead of time was also not only all the stuff we've been talking about lends itself to doing more macro or more close-ups or more What's the word for, somebody coined a term, I think, for landscapes, but it was very close up landscapes. There's a term for it, I think, that something else to rethink is just think of macro and zoomed in and close ups. And if you're photographing people of any kind, then you have that big softbox in the sky to really soften the light already and take advantage of that difference.
Another thing I'd like to suggest is I really like shooting fall colors at night, which sounds a little kooky because you're not getting the sunlight on them and really bright, but there is moonlight, so full moon can be a fantastic time to go out and shoot fall colors, and you can do star trails over them for something interesting in the sky that turns out blue.
What happens to colors in moonlight?
They look like daylight, basically.
Okay.
But the advantage you can get is during the day to do things like swirling leaves in a river. And out here in the West, the rivers slow down and get really slow. So the leaves move really slow. So you either have to get up neutral density filter to shoot them during the day. And those can be kind of a challenge to work with because they really fall off in the corners if you have an ultra-wide lens. But at night with the full moon, you can get swirls of leaves in a single 30-second shot. And if you want to get them even more and get quite a bit more swirling, you just do a star trail shot and keep your camera on a tripod. And you can either do a single shot that's minutes long, or you can do successive 30-second shots and combine them to make a star trail shot. And so you get not only the star trails in the sky, but the leaf trails in the river. I love doing that. And then the other thing to do, if you're not near the full moon with moonlight, is you can do Milky Way shots in like the first 2 or 3 weeks of October, as long as you're within about a week of the full moon. And you could do Milky Way over, landscape scale fall colors. So that's kind of cool.
Oh, interesting. I think it sounds like you went away a little bit to the other side of the room for just a second there, but
I leaned back and I got back from my mic and then realized I was too far from the mic, so I'm back. I was dreaming about Milky Way landscapes in the fall, floating away.
So you're saying, I'm writing this down, you're saying the first, what part of October?
The Milky Way has set too much by the time you get to November, and it's still around in September, but somewhere like the first half of October, it's high enough that you can usually still get it as long as the new moon is in that first half of the month. So at least 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks into October, you could still get some good Milky Way shots. And by then it will have rotated around to the southwest to west type, shooting disc or angles. So like here in the Eastern Sierra, it's perfect. It'll be perched on the Sierra Nevada and you can shoot up a canyon or, across some trees and get the Milky Way up there.
So come up to Jeff's workshops and shoot the Milky Way.
And we'll be doing this in October. First half of October. Yeah, we'll be out there second week of October. And I confess I did schedule it to do both daytime fall colors and Milky Way at night. I think. Perfect. Maybe there's a full moon. Either way, we'll do whatever it is. We'll do it.
Well, I think Milky Way is going to get popular on Photofocus. It keeps coming up each time we seem to bring up. We brought up nighttime. We brought up Milky Way a couple of times in a couple of shows. So that's going to be. Maybe we're going to start a trend here.
It's good stuff. I mean, people might start shooting it. I've been shooting Milky Way. I've been an avid night photographer since 2009. And then one of the very few contests I did enter, the first one I entered with a night photo in 2011, I won Astronomy Photographer of the Year with Royal Observatory Greenwich. Their People in Space category. I was down at the Toronto Pinnacles and got myself against the Milky Way, silhouetted against the sky. And so I should have entered a lot more contests, I guess. That actually kicked off my my workshops. I decided we'd start leading night photography trips to Bodie. And we had so much fun the first time. We did like 3 that year, and then we've done 4 or 5 years since. So
Now, I
that's
embarrassingly only know about Bodie because I know you, which is so tell everybody that's up in the Sierra. Is it in the foothills, or is it up
It's
in this
in the
area
Bodie
that's
Hills, which are
it's
just
between?
across the Sierra from you. It's in the Eastern Sierra. They're like their own little set of hills above Mono Lake, which also is very cool.
Yeah.
And somebody discovered gold there in the 1860s, and the town sprung up, and it was really active in the 1880s through early 1900s. And it was an authentic Wild West frontier gold mining town. Produced in today's dollars billions of dollars worth of gold. Had so many dozens of saloons and hundreds of buildings when it was full size. A lot of it burned down in a couple of big fires, one in the 30s. But then when the state park got interested in the property, one gentleman had kind of bought up the properties as they became available. So he was able to transfer the entire town basically to the state. But the caveat was for the deal to go through, they had to leave it as is. So they try to maintain it in the same state it was in as much as they can. When they took over the property in 1962. So it's as close as it possibly could be to a visitor discovering it on their own back in the 60s with all the old vehicles and buildings and artifacts still where they had been left when people left the town. So it's a pretty cool place to visit. It's not like the a lot of them are kind of like theme parks these days. This isn't that. It's like the
So
opposite.
now is that without cheating too much? Let's see. So if anybody, whoever knows the West Coast, we're talking the Northern California, Northern Nevada area, right? So not near
It's
San
pretty
Francisco
much
or
on the
Las Vegas,
dividing
but
line.
okay. But I
It's
mean, it's north.
actually,
Is
well, San Francisco's. Go
a
ahead.
few hours west, west from there, I guess. Okay, I'm cheating now. I'm looking at a map now.
Yeah,
So
it's
the closest
probably.
thing would be Reno, yeah, Carson
Yeah,
City,
it's
Reno.
about 2 hours south of Reno, or you can come up from the LA area in probably 6 or 7 hours, or you can come over from San Francisco, cross a pass in about 3 hours, and be in Bodie in about four and a half.
Right.
And
Okay.
it's probably even with about Monterey, so a little south of the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and a few hours north of the Los Angeles area.
So you can combine that trip with Winnemucca, just to make sure you hit all the hot spots.
Ha!
It's been my favorite
Well,
name. My favorite name of towns ever since living in
yeah,
Nevada. That's
here's
my
an
favorite.
interesting. We actually are going to connect that area with Death Valley, which is kind of counterintuitive because you think of Death Valley as being somewhere you go in the winter so you don't fry, or spring when they're wildflowers. And then you think of, well, you can only get to Bodie conveniently in the summer in the Mono Lake area. But we're going to actually, there's a unique kind of lineup of when the new moon and full moon happened this December. We're going to start with a sunset moonrise in Mono Lake and then spend 2 days in the Eastern Sierra in essentially winter conditions, and then drive over a hill to Death Valley where it will be, the hottest place in the country essentially, for a week down there. And then we're going to end with the Geminid meteor shower. So we're kind of going to do a winter and desert trip all in one. And
These are going to be
and it's only
workshops.
yeah, this is another workshop, and the thing that's unique is that full moon sunrise moonset at Mono Lake, and Mono Lake gets really calm in the winter because there isn't the heat and convection that creates the winds in the summer. So you get this gorge, and it's also 3 times saltier than the ocean. So the water is very flat and dense and reflects the moonlight and the sunset very, very well. And that just happens to be exactly 7 days or 6 nights ahead of the Geminid meteor shower. So we can do the Mono Lake event that my co-instructor, Lori Hibbett, and we like going down there just on our own, just because we like shooting that winter moonrise at Mono Lake. And it just happens to be just perfect timing so that we can also bring people not only to that, but to all the way through Death Valley for 5 days and end on the meteor shower on the last morning. So, for that to happen, that moon has to be exactly that many days ahead. And there's only a 1 in 30 chance of that. So it's like once every 28 years, the moon will come back around to being a week ahead of the Geminid meteor shower again. So I probably won't be leading workshops then.
whenever we get talking about these places or other destination things, it just makes me eager to get back into just that destination photography would be. Everybody listening,
get out your bucket list.
Yeah, it's time. It's time to stop this hanging around the same area anymore. Can't complain. It's a beautiful area, but
that's a whole. We'll have to get into that one next time. Do you go to new places or do you go back to the same place? And I have strong opinions on that.
Yes,
but I don't want to hijack the conversation.
We can give a preview, because that will be that both. There's advantages to both, as always. This is like, I think I mentioned pretty often, I kind of wanted to call this podcast the It Depends podcast, because that's almost always the answer. And that's one of those things, like going back and shooting the same thing. My example would be the Blue Angels in San Francisco. Every year from the rooftop where I used to live, every year I'd get 2 chances, practice and the real thing. And the difference between my figuring out how to get interesting shots. So before it was just a blue plane against a blue sky, but I learned how to make good photos out of it. And that's only because I did it over and over.
Yep.
And it's great for that. But I want to go to all of the places, and most places, you be honest, we're not going to be able to go back to a lot of the most exotic places very many times in our lives.
Right.
But so yeah, advantages to both. Yeah.
Well, we find that when we're going around, say, Yosemite, and the light is different in every season.
Yeah.
And the alignments are different, and certain things light up in one season but not another. And when you do multiple years of, say, fall colors, you find things that you can go back to that there's 10 minutes of just the right light or 15 minutes of just the right light, where either a spotlight comes on, some yellow cottonwoods and a reflection, and then it's gone. Or the opposite, you get a shadow on the water, and when you get a shadow on the water, you can then get a reflection that you couldn't have gotten before or after because the sunlight was illuminating the bottom of the river. And those are the kinds of things, and then just serendipitous weather that you can't get or can't find unless you go back to a place over and over again.
Yeah.
Ansel Adams associated with Yosemite. It's not because he went there once and got lucky weather. It's because he was there living there for, a decade, if not a lot more. I don't know. I don't remember the exact, I think he was there for decades, but.
Do we know exactly where he lived in the area? I've never thought about this before.
I don't recall. Oh, I thought he just lived with his camera.
Yeah, just in a tent, no doubt.
You just that hood he would put over himself, he would just spread it out, and that was his tent.
He probably lived with the bears. Lord knows there's enough of those up there.
Well, there are all these pictures of him on his station wagon too. He had a platform on top, and so he probably did. That was the minivan of the time, the camper van. So he probably did a fair amount of camping just out of the back of his car. So
yeah,
and we do that with an SUV, so it's pretty similar.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's. Like I often say, in fact, we can just along with as we kind of sign off, we can reiterate that if you want us to get more into any of these things, ask the questions, because we'll talk about them if people are asking. So otherwise, we'll go off sometimes into our own questions like I did today. But I did want to say thank you to the people that wrote questions. They wrote the questions well, because before I had to sort of figure out what they meant, and this time they came in So I hope that I'm happy that people are listening to what I asked. But anyway, you can go to either email questions at photofocus.com, or you can go to photofocus.com/questions. See all the same words, just different pattern. And either way, you can send audio questions too. I'm happy to play them. I like my little sounds. I like to crackle the paper, or I like to, whatever we need. And we'll play your audio questions. So just for me, just for fun, send your audio questions. And with that, let's just sign off. One more chance to tell people where to find you, Jeff, if you like.
JeffSullivanPhotography.com.
All right.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Yeah, so it's been great to have you. Thanks for filling in for Rob. Hopefully we'll have you from time to time.
Always a pleasure.
I know I'm kind of leading up 2 shows a month, and Shamir's leading up another one, and we might do more. So if people write in and let us know what you'd like, it could grow out, and I'd love to have Jeff back. I'd have some other people come back from time to time. So let us know, and you can find me at ronpepper.com as well. And thanks again to Tamron and Photofocus thank you to Tamron and Photomatix for sponsoring, and we'll see you coming up for the roundtable and for the Q&A after that. And with that, go out and shoot. See you next time. Ciao.
Catch you later. Thanks, man.